The first time my own daughter told me I was no longer needed, it was said so casually that it took a full second for the words to land. "You don't really contribute anymore, Mom," she said, eyes still on her phone. "We'll handle things from here." I was standing in my kitchen. My kitchen. The one with the worn oak cabinets I refinished myself in my 40s. The one where I had cooked every Thanksgiving dinner, every Christmas morning, every birthday cake for over 3 decades. I remember the sound before anything else. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the wall clock, my own breath catching in my chest. I was 62 years old, not fragile, not confused, not dying, just inconvenient. That moment didn't start the betrayal, it revealed it. What my daughter Melissa didn't know was that I had already seen the cracks forming months earlier. The quiet glances she shared with her husband Brian. The way conversations stopped when I entered the room. The sudden interest in my finances, my will, my long-term plans. They thought I was unaware. They were wrong. I had moved in with them after my husband Thomas passed away. Not because I couldn't live alone, but because Melissa insisted. She cried. She said the house would feel empty without me. She said family sticks together. I sold my smaller home and put the money into a joint account Melissa convinced me to open for convenience. She promised it would make things easier as I aged. I trusted her. That trust was my first mistake. The second mistake was ignoring the way Brian looked at me like a ledger that needed balancing. He worked in finance. Numbers were his religion. And I was in his eyes a depreciating asset. The night of the comment, after Melissa dismissed me with a wave of her hand, I went upstairs to the guest room. The room they had started calling my space, as if the rest of the house no longer belonged to me. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt something unfamiliar settle into my bones. Clarity. I thought about the way Melissa had begun correcting me in front of others. The way she scheduled doctor appointments I hadn't asked for. The way she once joked at Thanksgiving dinner in front of her in-laws. "We'll need to start thinking about assisted living soon." Everyone laughed. I did too. But that night alone I replayed everything with new eyes. And I realized something chilling. They weren't waiting for me to decline. They were planning for it. Downstairs, I heard Brian's voice drift up through the vents. "Sooner is better," he said, before she changes her mind. Melissa replied softer but firm. "She won't. She trusts me." I pressed my hand over my mouth. That was the moment I stopped being their mother and became their problem. I didn't confront them. I didn't cry. I didn't pack a bag. I did something far more dangerous. I listened. I learned quickly that silence can be a weapon when everyone assumes you are powerless. For weeks after that night, I played the role they expected. The aging mother, the grateful grandmother, the woman who smiled too much and asked permission for small things. Inside, I was counting. Melissa started handling my mail to help. Brian offered to review my statements to protect me from scams. They spoke about me in the third person while I sat at the table nodding along like furniture. One afternoon, Melissa slid a folder across the table. "Just some paperwork," she said lightly. "Standard stuff." I didn't open it right away. I looked at her instead. At the daughter I raised alone for several years while Thomas worked nights. The girl whose scraped knees I kissed. The woman who now avoided my eyes. "What kind of paperwork?" I asked. She smiled too fast. "Power of attorney, temporary, just in case." Just in case. I told her I would review it later. Brian frowned. It was brief, but I saw it. The impatience, the calculation. That night, I waited until the house was asleep. I took the folder to my room and read every word under the lamp, my hands steady. It wasn't temporary. It gave Melissa control over my finances, my medical decisions, my assets. Everything. I didn't sign it. Instead, I started making calls. The first was to an old friend from church, Eleanor, who had gone to law school after her divorce in her 50s. She listened without interrupting. "Do not sign anything," she said, "and do not tell them you won't." The second call was to a lawyer she recommended. Quiet, methodical, ruthless in the way only ethical people can be. Over several meetings, we uncovered the full picture. The joint account, the slow transfers, the way my savings had been quietly redirected, the draft of a will I had never seen naming Melissa as sole executor. They were preparing to exclude me from my own life. But they had underestimated one thing. I remembered who I was before motherhood softened me, before marriage taught me compromise, before age made people think I was done. With my lawyer's guidance, I opened new accounts. I documented everything. I changed beneficiaries. I rewrote my will with surgical precision. And then I waited. Because revenge is not loud at first. It is patient, and it always waits for the moment when the truth hurts the most. That moment came on Thanksgiving, and when it did, everything they thought they controlled slipped through their fingers. Thanksgiving has a way of exposing fault lines in families. Everyone was present. Melissa's in-laws, Brian's brother and his wife, even neighbors I barely knew. The house smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon layered over tension so thick it made my skin itch. I watched Melissa glide through the room, confident, efficient, already acting like the matriarch. She corrected my placement of the serving spoons. She redirected questions meant for me. She spoke about future holidays as if I were a temporary guest. I let her. Dinner began with forced laughter and clinking glasses. Brian stood to make a toast. To family, he said, smiling broadly, and to planning ahead so we can take care of the people we love. His eyes flicked to me. I smiled back. Midway through the meal, Melissa placed her hand on my arm. "Mom," she said sweetly, loudly enough for the table to hear. "We wanted to talk to you about something, just briefly." The room quieted. I knew this moment. They had rehearsed it. I could almost hear the script. "We've been worried," she continued, "about your memory, about stress. Brian and I think it might be time to start transitioning responsibilities." There it was. The first cut. "I see," I said calmly. Brian leaned forward. "It's not a bad thing. Lots of families do this. Assisted living, oversight, structure." Structure. Melissa reached for the folder, the same one, the unsigned one. "If you could just sign," she said, "it would make everyone feel better." I looked around the table, faces expectant, curious, some uncomfortable, some sympathetic. This was their stage. So I stood up. "I won't be signing anything tonight," I said. Silence dropped like a plate shattering. Melissa's smile faltered. "Mom, don't make this awkward." "I'm not," I replied. "You are." I turned to the guests. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs," I said, "but I appreciate learning who believes otherwise." Brian's jaw tightened. "This isn't the time." "You're right," I said. "It's not." I sat back down and picked up my fork. The meal continued, but the energy had shifted. Melissa barely spoke. Brian drank too much wine. Later that night, as guests bundled into coats and leftovers were packed away, Melissa cornered me in the kitchen. "You embarrassed us," she hissed. "You tried to erase me," I replied quietly. "We're even." Her eyes hardened. "You don't understand what you're risking," she said. I looked her straight in the eye. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, "I understand exactly." That night I slept better than I had in months, because now the game was out in the open. The retaliation began the next morning. Melissa stopped speaking to me unless necessary. Brian became icy, his politeness sharp enough to cut. I was excluded from conversations, from plans, from decisions made about a house I was still helping pay for. They thought isolation would scare me. Instead, it gave me room. I spent my days quietly preparing, copying documents, recording dates, saving emails. I moved valuables to a safety deposit box they didn't know existed. I met with my lawyer weekly. And then came the accusation. Mom, Melissa said one afternoon, standing in the doorway of my room, "Brian thinks you moved money without telling us." I looked up from my book. I did. Her eyes widened. "You what?" "My money," I clarified. "I moved my money." "You can't just do that," she snapped. I tilted my head. "Why not?" "Because they had assumed I wouldn't." Brian stormed in moments later, face flushed. "We're trying to protect you," he said. "This behavior is exactly why we're concerned." Concern. That word again. "I think it's time we talk to a doctor," Melissa added. "Get an evaluation." There it was. The threat beneath the kindness. I nodded slowly. "That's a good idea." They froze. "I'd like a full evaluation," I continued. "And I'd like my lawyer present." Brian scoffed. "Why would you need a lawyer for a doctor visit?" "Because," I said evenly, "people who don't plan to lie don't fear witnesses." The room went silent. That night I received an email from Melissa. Subject line: next steps. Inside was a list: assisted living options, financial oversight services, a timeline. They had already decided. What they didn't know was that I had decided too. And my next move wouldn't be quiet. It would be final. Because once a woman realizes she is being erased on purpose, she stops asking to be included. She starts writing the ending herself. The doctor's office smelled like antiseptic and old magazines, the kind of place where time feels suspended. Melissa sat to my left, Brian to my right, close enough that I could feel the heat of their bodies, as if proximity alone might transfer authority. The physician, Dr. Randall, was a man in his early 40s with kind eyes and a practiced neutrality. He shook my hand first. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "what brings you in today?" I answered before Melissa could open her mouth. I'm here for a full cognitive evaluation requested by my family, with my attorney present. Melissa stiffened. Brian's foot tapped against the tile. Dr. Randall glanced at Eleanor, who sat calmly with a leather notebook on her lap. Of course, he said. That's your right. The evaluation took over an hour. Memory recall, pattern recognition, reasoning questions, short conversations designed to assess coherence and judgment. I answered carefully, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted every response to be unassailable. When it was over, Dr. Randall folded his hands. Mrs. Harper, he said, there is no evidence of cognitive impairment. Your memory, reasoning, and executive function are all well within normal range for your age. I watched Melissa's face crumble just a fraction. Brian leaned back, arms crossed. So Eleanor asked gently, can we document that? Yes, Dr. Randall replied. I'll have a formal report by the end of the day. In the car afterward, no one spoke. At home, Melissa finally broke. This doesn't change anything, she said sharply. We're still worried. About what I asked. She hesitated. Brian answered for her. About you making impulsive decisions, he said. Like moving money. I nodded. Then you'll be relieved to know I've made very careful ones. That night after they went to bed, I finalized something I had been circling for weeks. I removed Melissa as my healthcare proxy. I named Eleanor instead. The next morning, I handed Melissa the document over breakfast. Her hands shook as she read. You can't do this, she said. I already did, I replied. Brian stood up so abruptly his chair scraped the floor. You're tearing this family apart, he said. I looked at him steadily. No, I'm refusing to be dismantled. That afternoon, I received an email notification. Melissa had scheduled a meeting with a social worker. Without me, I forwarded it to Eleanor. Her response was immediate. They're escalating. Good, we're ready. For the first time since Thomas died, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear. Momentum. The social worker arrived on a Wednesday morning, clipboard in hand, smile, fixed but cautious. Her name was Denise. She had the careful posture of someone trained to look for cracks. We sat in the living room. Melissa perched on the edge of the sofa. Brian hovered near the doorway. Denise asked questions about my daily routine, my finances, my relationships. I answered openly. Then Eleanor slid a folder across the coffee table. Before we proceed, she said, I think it's important to review some context. Inside were bank statements, email exchanges, the unsigned power of attorney, a timeline of events, the doctor's report. Denise's expression changed as she flipped through the pages. I wasn't aware of this, she said slowly. Of course not, Melissa snapped. She's manipulating the situation. Denise looked up. Mrs. Harper, are you being coerced in any way? No, I said, I'm being pressured. By whom? I met Melissa's eyes, by my daughter and her husband. The room went still. Denise closed the folder. Based on what I'm seeing, there is no basis for intervention. In fact, she paused. There are concerns here about financial exploitation. Brian laughed harshly. That's ridiculous. Is it? Eleanor asked. Because the paper trail suggests otherwise. Denise stood. I'll be filing a report reflecting these findings. After she left, Melissa exploded. You planned this, she shouted. You turned everything against us. No, I said quietly. You did. Brian grabbed his coat. We're done playing nice. I watched them storm upstairs, doors slamming. That night, I slept with my door locked. Not out of fear, but clarity. The next morning, I packed a suitcase. Not to leave. To reclaim space. I moved into the master bedroom, the one Melissa had claimed as hers when I arrived. I placed my clothes in the closet, my photo of Thomas on the nightstand. When Melissa saw it, she stared at me as if I had struck her. You can't just take over, she said. I'm not taking over, I replied. I'm returning. That evening, I called a realtor. By the end of the week, the house was appraised. The deed was not in Melissa's name. It never had been. They had forgotten that detail, or assumed I had. The open loop they never saw coming was this. They thought the house was theirs because I lived quietly inside it. They were about to learn the difference between residence and ownership. And when they did, everything would change. The appraisal arrived on a Friday morning, sealed in a plain white envelope that Melissa left unopened on the counter, assuming it was junk mail. I opened it myself. The number didn't surprise me. The house had appreciated quietly over the years, just like I had. What surprised me was how much power a single piece of paper could restore when the truth had been buried under assumptions. That evening, I asked Melissa and Brian to sit down, not as a request. As a courtesy, they sat across from me at the dining table, the same table where Melissa had once done her homework, where I had balanced checkbooks and birthday candles. Brian crossed his arms. Melissa kept her phone face down, jaw tight. I spoke to a realtor, I said calmly. The house is being prepared for sale. Melissa laughed sharp and disbelieving. You can't sell our house. I slid the deed across the table. My house, I corrected. Brian leaned forward, scanning the document. His face changed first, confusion, then calculation, then something close to panic. That's not possible, Melissa said. We've been paying the mortgage. No, I replied. You've been contributing. The mortgage has always been in my name. Silence stretched. Brian cleared his throat. You wouldn't do this. Where would we go? I folded my hands. That's not my responsibility. Melissa's voice cracked. You're punishing us. I'm protecting myself. You're choosing money over family, she snapped. I met her eyes. You chose control over love. That was the moment she understood she had lost. Over the next few days, the house transformed into a battlefield disguised as normalcy. Melissa oscillated between tears and rage. Brian made phone calls in hushed tones, trying to negotiate to stall to regain leverage. There was none. The realtor arrived with staging suggestions. I approved them. Melissa objected. I overruled her. For the first time in her life, my daughter learned what it felt like to be excluded from a decision. One night, she stood in the doorway of my room. You're really doing this, she said quietly. Yes, she swallowed. After everything. After everything I agreed. The listing went live the following week. The house sold in less than 10 days. All cash. No contingencies. The closing date was set, and with it a deadline they could not manipulate. They moved out before the closing. Not gracefully, not with apologies, just boxes slammed doors and silence so loud it echoed. Melissa didn't hug me goodbye. Brian avoided eye contact. I watched from the front porch as they loaded the last of their belongings into a rented truck. The house looked different already, lighter, like it was exhaling after years of holding its breath. The day of closing, Eleanor sat beside me at the long conference table. Papers were signed, funds transferred, keys handed over. Just like that, the chapter closed. I moved into a smaller place across town. Not because I needed less, but because I wanted intention. Sunlight in the mornings, a garden I could manage myself, silence that felt earned. Melissa didn't call, but she did send an email. You destroyed our future. I read it once, then archived it, because the truth was simpler and harder. I had destroyed their illusion. Weeks passed. The quiet settled in layers. At first it felt unfamiliar, then luxurious. I cooked when I wanted, slept without locking my door, took walks without reporting where I was going. One afternoon, Eleanor came by with tea. They may try one last thing, she said. People who lose power rarely leave without testing the locks. She was right. 2 days later, I received a notice. Melissa had filed a claim alleging undue influence and emotional abuse. I stared at the letter and felt nothing but resolve. Good, I told Eleanor on the phone. Letter. Because this time I wasn't reacting. I was ready. I gathered my records, my timelines, my witnesses, and for the first time since this began, I felt something deeper than anger or fear. I felt certainty. The next confrontation wouldn't be about money or housing or paperwork. It would be about the truth. And once the truth entered a courtroom, it would never belong to her again. The escalation was complete. What came next would end everything, one way or another. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, emotionally. Melissa sat across from me with her attorney posture, rigid eyes rimmed with red that suggested either exhaustion or performance. Brian was not there. That absence spoke louder than any testimony could. The claim she filed accused me of emotional abuse, manipulation, and undue influence. She argued that I had used my age, my grief, and my position as a mother to destabilize her marriage and force her out of her home. Her home. I listened as her lawyer painted me as fragile but cunning, a woman who weaponized vulnerability. He spoke of power dynamics, of guilt, of how children often feel trapped by aging parents who refuse to let go. I recognized the story. It was neat, modern, palatable. It was also false. When it was my turn, Eleanor stood. She did not rush. She did not dramatize. She laid out facts. The unsigned power of attorney. The timeline of financial transfers initiated without my consent. The medical evaluation clearing me of any cognitive decline. The social worker's report flagging potential financial exploitation. Then she called witnesses. The realtor who confirmed ownership. The banker who testified that account changes were initiated by me alone. Dr. Randall, calm and precise, who stated plainly that I was fully competent. Finally, Eleanor called Melissa. Watching my daughter take the stand was harder than anything else. Not because I doubted the outcome, but because I saw how far she had gone to preserve a story that no longer served her. She cried. She spoke about fear. about responsibility, about how she felt overwhelmed. Then Eleanor asked one question. Did your mother ever sign the power of attorney you presented to her? Melissa hesitated. No. Did she ever agree to relinquish control of her finances? No. Did you proceed anyway? Silence. The judge leaned forward. Melissa's voice dropped. Yes. That was the moment. The room shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but permanently. The judge dismissed the claim with a warning about future filings and potential consequences for misuse of the court system. He did not scold, he did not sympathize. He simply ended it. Outside the courthouse, Melissa avoided me. Her lawyer spoke to Eleanor quietly. Brian never appeared. I stood on the steps, breathing in the crisp air, and felt something I hadn't expected. Grief, not for what I lost, for what my daughter had chosen to become. That night, alone in my new living room, I poured myself a glass of water and sat by the window. Cars passed, lights flickered, life moved on. I thought the story would end there. I was wrong, because when control fails in public, it often retreats to private places. And that's where the most dangerous truths tend to surface. The call came just after Christmas. It was Brian. I hadn't heard his voice in weeks. I need to talk to you, he said, alone. I considered saying no. Instead, I told him where to meet me. A quiet coffee shop near the river, neutral ground, windows everywhere. He arrived looking thinner, older. The confidence he once wore like armor had cracked. I'm filing for divorce, he said without preamble. I nodded, I assumed. He stared into his cup. She blamed you for everything. That's easier than accountability. He flinched. You don't know everything. I waited. There were loans, he said. Credit cards. Things she didn't tell you about. Or me at first. My chest tightened. What does that have to do with me? He met my eyes. She used your money. Quietly. The joint account. She said you approved. The room felt suddenly too small. How much, I asked. He exhaled. Enough that I'm personally liable now. I closed my eyes. This was the hidden truth. The one that explained the urgency, the manipulation, the need to control. She was trying to cover it, he continued. If she had access to your assets legally, it would have disappeared. And when I refused, I said she escalated. He nodded. I sat back, letting the weight of it settle. This doesn't change anything I said. I won't rescue you. I know, he replied. I'm not asking. There was a pause. I'm telling you because the judge will ask, he said. And because you deserve to know. We sat in silence. Outside, snow began to fall. When we stood to leave, Brian hesitated. You were right, he said quietly. About everything. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because some acknowledgments arrived too late to matter. That evening, I updated my lawyer. We documented everything, prepared statements, secured protections. And then I did something unexpected. I forgave myself for trusting, for staying quiet, for confusing love with sacrifice. Melissa's choices would follow her. In court, in marriage, in memory. Mine would follow me forward. The final act was approaching. Not one of confrontation, but of release. And with it a reckoning no one could undo. Freedom does not arrive with applause. It arrives quietly on an ordinary morning when you wake up and realize no one is trying to manage you anymore. I noticed it in the smallest things first. I stopped checking my phone with dread. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head before speaking. I stopped wondering who was watching, judging, keeping score. Melissa did not contact me again. Through Eleanor, I learned the divorce was finalized quickly. Brian cooperated. Melissa did not. There were debts uncovered, accounts frozen, explanations demanded. The life she had tried to build on control collapsed under the weight of its own lies. That was karma, slow, methodical, impersonal. I did not celebrate it. I focused on rebuilding myself. I volunteered at a community legal clinic twice a week, helping older women organize paperwork, understand wills, recognize manipulation before it hardened into damage. I listened more than I spoke. When I did speak, I chose my words carefully, because power, I had learned, is not about dominance. It is about clarity. One afternoon, while sorting donated files, I came across a phrase scribbled on a sticky note by another volunteer. Being kind does not require being silent. I copied it into my journal. Daniel never existed in this story. Melissa was my only child. And that truth stripped bare hurt in ways no courtroom could touch. But it also gave me something precious. Acceptance. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come in a form that mattered. I stopped imagining alternate versions of my daughter who chose differently. Instead, I honored the woman who had survived raising her, loving her, and finally letting go. On my birthday, I took myself to dinner. A quiet restaurant, a window seat, I ordered dessert first. No one rushed me. No one corrected me. No one spoke for me. I raised my glass to no one in particular and whispered, "You did it." Not to spite anyone, but to acknowledge the truth. I had ended the cycle. If you are listening to this story, I want you to know something important. This was never just about revenge. It was about inheritance. Not money, not houses, not accounts or documents. It was about what we pass down when no one is watching. For years, I believed that endurance was love, that silence was grace, that sacrifice was my role as a mother, as a woman, as someone over 50 who should be grateful to still be included. That belief almost cost me my autonomy. It almost erased me. The moment I stopped asking for permission to exist, everything changed. Not overnight, not easily, but permanently. Melissa lost control because she mistook access for ownership. She believed proximity gave her rights. She believed love entitled her to power. She was wrong. I did not win by humiliating her. I did not win by destroying her publicly. I won by standing still while the truth caught up. I won by protecting my will, my name, my voice. I won by refusing to be excluded from my own life. Today, my home is quiet, peaceful, intentionally mine. My papers are in order, my future is clear, my dignity is intact. And that more than any courtroom ruling is justice. If this story resonated with you, if you recognize pieces of your own life in mine, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you are listening from. Tell me which moment stayed with you. If you believe this was the right outcome, please like this story. And if you want to hear more real stories about betrayal karma and women who refuse to disappear quietly, subscribe and stay with us. Because no matter your age, your story is not over, and your voice still matters.